In this tutorial in AudioDirector 365, we'd like to show you a little bit about the new interface, but focus on a new feature that they're highlighting called Podcast Studio. When you open up AudioDirector 365, you're going to see this splash screen. It's very much like what you would see in PowerDirector 365 and PhotoDirector 365. In the middle on the left, you see the two major windows that have been part of AudioDirector for a long time, Edit Clips and Mix. We'll go there in a moment. And then you see some tools that they're highlighting that are relatively new in the darker color, from vocal removal all the way to Podcast Studio. And then you see a record button plus some other elements in the gray boxes below. Let's look a little bit at how to navigate around the interface. I'm going to click on Mix, for example. That will take us to a very familiar screen, and it will load one of the elements that I had last time I was editing in my Mix screen. We have three buttons on the left. We have Mix. If I click the other button on the Start screen, I would have gone to this screen, which is Edit. The next one we have is Record. It's opening up this screen about the sampling rate. I'm going to click and turn this off. What we're going to see when we also click on the record is this little button called Podcast Studio. Let's see what happens when we click there. We open up a screen, and in most cases it's going to be much smaller than this. It's going to be probably about this size to start with. And it gives you a timeline at the bottom, and then it asks if you want to add audio. Now, the thing I've discovered about Podcast Studio is, though it's integrated with your regular AudioDirector program, it basically acts like a standalone add-in. I can't take elements that I have already loaded into the normal interface and drag and drop them in here, or it doesn't know that they're here in the other interface at all. So we're basically looking at something that acts like it's almost a secondary program that works by itself. So that's something to keep in mind. So there's several things you can do when you get there. If you want to close the window, you can get back to Podcast Studio whenever you're on the record button. I can be working in the one part of the program that I'm familiar with, and I can click on the Edit menu. Then I can go back to Record, and then I could open up the Podcast Studio anytime I want. The only issue is that when I do that, I have to think totally different program, separate everything. So let's make it big screen again, and it wants to add some audio. We'll do that, and let's click on this WAV file here and open it. So now it's open in this program, but it's not open in AudioDirector. This is an interesting interface. If you look at the bottom, anything you load is added to the timeline at the bottom. Right now, here's my one component. It says it's 5 minutes and 12 seconds long, and that's what we see for the time below. If I click another Add Audio, I can add in front or behind. Let's add behind, and I'll click another one, and we'll open it up, and it added it to the end. And notice our total time is 7:58. And we have the distinct time of both of these. Now, if you want to either edit these or shorten them, there's several options. You can shorten any of them by trimming them down in the main timeline. You take the playhead where you want to go, move it where you want it to be, and you can click on the little razor tool, and now that cut that into two pieces, and each piece is represented up here. What you can also do is you can edit it on the main line. Let's take this other one. We'll click on this, and you notice the playhead positions are mirrored on both screens. And I can right-click, and I can do trim or split. What's the difference? Well, when I do split, it will break it into two pieces. The other way I can do that without moving the playhead is when I get it exactly where I want it, I can click on the three dots, and I can use split, and now it split that last component into two subcomponents. You can tell by the title in the upper left-hand corner what it belongs to. So that's how you can split and trim those elements. You can play at any time. You can also simply trim without splitting. So let me take this element here, and I'm going to right click here or click on the dots, and I'll do a trim. Now this allows you to do your regular trim function, and that's different from splitting it, but it will change the time. For example, look down here, we have 7 minutes 58 seconds when I apply the trim. Now it's 7 minutes and 3 seconds because it's applying the trimmed area. You can take and untrim it in a sense. You can move this wherever you want, and you can change where it starts and stops, and you can actually make it exactly like the original piece. So those are some of the things that you can do with the elements that you put on the timeline. I haven't found a way to merge things that you've trimmed, so we'll just leave that trimmed about there. Now there's some other tools you can do both on the main timeline and on the segments. You can enhance or transcribe. Now these two buttons are for all. If I click here and I click on my 3 buttons, I can also enhance or transcribe, but it will only affect that particular clip. So if I click on enhance on this one, it will improve the speech in the clip. Now this one has no speech. Let's see what happens when I click on it. So you notice what it did. Really changed the waveform dramatically because it was music rather than regular speech. There is no way to unenhance that I can find so far. These areas here are definitely speech, so the enhancement would change. Let me take the My Test and split that again. I'm going to right click and we'll split it. And so now we have one that's 17 seconds long. If I right click on that and click on Enhance, this will change the audio file. And that's what Enhance is basically designed to do because we're working in what's considered a podcast environment. But notice it also changed it here as well. And can I do some other basic editing using the Podcast Studio? As of right now, I haven't seen a way to do that. The other option you have is you can transcribe something. Now let's take this element we have here, 3 minutes long. Let's make it about a minute. Let's do our split. Okay, this is 44 seconds long now. Let's see what happens when I try to transcribe, because this has voice on it. I'm going to click on transcribe. It tells me how many credits it will use. It will use 1 credit per minute. So let's do that. I'm going to click on transcribe and click on OK. And so here's the transcription that goes along with that. Let me see what happens when I click on export. We have metadata that I can export. We have a profile I can work on. The format's MP3. Now the transcript will export into an SRT folder, which is something you can use in AudioDirector. So I can choose to export the transcript file and the audio file, or one or the other. Let's just try to export the transcript file. And it tells me where I'm going to put it. I'll click on here, and the transcript was successfully exported. I'm going to go into the file folder, click on this, and then I get to see this is my transcript, my SRT folder, which I could use if I were working in a YouTube environment. So the transcription is not free, and that's basically how it works. We also have the ability to do enhancement, and let me show you what the enhancement's like. I'm going to close down the screen. We won't save any changes in the project. Now in this copy of AudioDirector, if I go to the lower left corner, I'm going to make this larger. What I've done is I've taken an element with the original dialogue and then with a dialogue that was supposedly enhanced. I'm going to play this 40-50 seconds. You can hear the change from one to the other and decide for yourself if you think the enhancement made it better or not. So please listen to the following 45-50 seconds. In this tutorial in CyberLink PowerDirector, I'd like to give you some tips on two very useful techniques you can use in video editing. The first is trimming clips. The second is grouping clips. Let's look at trim first. I have on track number 1 a very long clip, and I only want a small part of it. I have a couple in this clip that are walking a dog. Now normally what I would do is I would take my playhead and drag on it left or right and try to find the spot where I have them walking the dog, and then I would cut it, and then I would go ahead and cut the end off of it when I'm done with that segment. There's a much more precise tool you can use in PowerDirector called your trim tool. So I'm going to move. You have a sense of the difference between the two. I'd be interested in your perspective on if you think the enhanced is worth it, if it makes it better or not. Again, enhancing costs you no credits. That's a beginning look at the podcast studio. I'm not sure exactly how I would use it, but that gives you a little bit of flavor of how they've designed it and what its primary features are.